On Free to Choose Friday, we celebrate our ability as free-thinking individuals to choose. Again, you're free to think, free to act, and free to choose. And you ought to be. But implicit in that is that you are an individual who is capable of making your own decisions and thinking through your own problems and your own situations. There's a phenomenon that has, in recent decades, swept across America, starting on college campuses and in academia and expanding well beyond that now into the much broader society. A phenomenon called identity politics. Today, here on Jimmy at the Crossroads, we're going to focus in on the idea of identity politics. We will talk with Mike Gonzalez, author of the brand new book, The Plot to Change America. He's also a fellow at the Heritage Foundation. And I'm very much looking forward to talking with him because this book is absolutely fascinating. It really delves into the history of identity politics, understanding its foundations, delving into its implications, and also talking about how we can stop it in its path. Identity politics, you see, stands in stark contrast, stands against the very idea of individualism, because it groups people together by some sort of idea of race or ethnicity. And as Mike Gonzalez documents in The Plot to Change America, that identification group might just be a fabrication, something made out of whole cloth by academics or self-interested individuals who have some financial motive or some political motive. That's why we're really going to delve into this identity politics question, more than just the idea that, gosh, it's wrong and it's causing problems and some of the violence in our streets right now can be put at the feet of identity politics. But it is because it stands against individualism and the very ideals upon which this country was based, that you as an individual, who is, again, free to think, free to act, and free to choose, can better your own life. It suggests that if you are part of a certain group that has been disadvantaged, then you have it tougher, and therefore you have a victimhood status, and the government and society should act accordingly. It diminishes your value as an individual, and it is a scourge. It is a scourge upon our society. Make no mistake about it. And one of the problems with this, too, is the idea that there are implications that come from identity politics that suggest you must act a certain way. You must speak a certain way. Well, Milton Friedman in Cut 2 had some thoughts on this idea of the freedom not to act that I think are especially relevant to this discussion of identity politics.
We want freedom, in my opinion, first, because we cannot know. We can never be sure we're right. And therefore, we have no right to force our views on other people. And second, because the thing that's really important is the individual's own values and his own beliefs. If you're not free to sin, then neither are you free to be virtuous. Virtue is a meaningless concept unless an individual has a free will to choose between one act and another. You and I might think very, very well of that individual if he jumped in and tried to rescue the man sinking. And we will impose that value on him through the social process whereby we construct values and transmit them to one another. A good society will certainly be one in which people in that position will be strongly inclined to move out and try to rescue the man there. But that's a very different question from saying that if the society is bad, we can make it good by using force to drive him out there to bring the other man in.
Identity politics nowadays is prevalent in government, in academics, K through 12 education, and in higher education, now even in the corporate world. And again, implicit in identity politics is this idea that you must act a certain way, that you must treat certain people in certain ways. For example, as though a minority group is a victim, and you must have that in your mind. You must act in a way which acknowledges your white privilege, perhaps. You must avoid microaggressions. The list goes on. Those are ideas that imply a certain type of behavior is virtuous, and you must act in that way. We cannot allow sin. You cannot allow somebody to act differently from how the elites have determined society must be conducted from an identitarian standpoint. We must group people among their different racial or ethnic identities, and we must treat them differently given this. Sometimes benefits may be accrued because you are part of a sort of victim class. That is the idea of identity politics, fundamentally. And it also suppresses the idea of freedom of speech. In Cut 3, Milton Friedman talked about why freedom of speech truly is so important. And if you cannot express your own views freely because you are concerned about some social constructs that are being presented to you as how you must act in accordance with, that is to say, you must abide these social constructs, then you're not able to truly and freely express yourself.
We believe the whole justification for free press, for free speech, for our whole system of adversary justice, the whole justification is that people will be best able to distinguish truth from falsity if they have an opportunity to hear a variety of different opinions. Now, if you only have one opinion spoken, to shift grounds, if we go to the Soviet Union, the people in the Soviet Union are enormously skeptical about what they hear from their government. But they cannot know the truth because they don't hear it. They have to conjecture what is the truth because they only hear one side. They don't believe that. Don't misunderstand me. They become experts at reading between the lines. But they still don't have access to the full variety of opinion which would enable them to choose and decide intelligently and reasonably about what's right. So let's by all means have a clash of opinion. Let different beliefs clash in the marketplace of ideas. But let's not have a monopoly or subsidization of one brand of ideas versus another.
And yet, when it comes to identity politics, isn't that what we're getting? Prioritization and subsidization of one brand of ideas? And that is the idea that identity politics is the name of the game. That we must group people along certain lines, and that we must treat them differently, given the ways in which we are dividing those individuals. Because they're not really individuals, they are part of groups. And if you dissent from this idea, you just might be ostracized. Now, it's gotten pretty damn bad on college campuses and in media, in K through 12 education, in the corporate world. The list goes on in terms of dissenting. But this is nothing new. It's just gotten worse over time. I want to take you back 2010, a decade ago. I was a student at Regis University, and I was perspectives editor of the Highlander newspaper, where I would often, on an issue-by-issue basis, publish conservative-themed articles on issues of the day. And sometimes I would take on topics that I knew might be a little more controversial, push back, provide some alternative perspectives. Sometimes I might go a little more middle of the road, so to speak. But they were always from a more conservative or libertarian-esque standpoint. Well, in November of 2010, I published an article in the Highlander, the student newspaper, Regis University in North Denver, Colorado, entitled The Inherent Divisiveness of Diversity. Now, the focus of this piece was on Diversity Week. Back then, before I heard anything of white privilege or microaggressions, the buzzword really was just diversity. We had an office of diversity, and there was this emphasis on diversity. And every year during the fall, there would be a Diversity Week. And I decided I wanted to challenge this idea because I felt that there was too much of a focus on dividing people along racial and ethnic lines instead of intellectual diversity. The idea that we have different perspectives that may be informed by our life experiences or our lived experiences among a certain race or ethnicity. And I wanted to share a few excerpts because I think that my experience in 2010 is sort of instructive about how far gone we have really become. Let's put it up on the screen here. Here are a couple of excerpts. I note that this country, that is the United States of America, has a storied history of being a melting pot, where people from all walks of life came, assimilated, or acculturated into society and formed one great American culture rich in a vast wealth of experiences. But over the past few decades, we have seen ourselves transformed from a melting pot into a salad bowl, where our differences have become far more prevalent than our similarities. I go on to say that it's not the specific aspects of Diversity Week that I take issue with, but the modern conception of diversity and the very idea of a Diversity Week in the first place, and why we have to set aside a period of time specifically for discussion of such issues. Is it necessary to accomplish these objectives by celebrating differences, as though we need to clearly delineate that someone is Asian American or African American or Muslim or gay and so on? It seems to me that by continually reinforcing our cultural differences instead of focusing on what binds us together, we may generate greater division than we ought to. And I just want to say that that's exactly what has happened over the past decade. We have seen greater divisions transpire in this country as a result of emphasizing this concept of diversity along racial, ethnic, and other lines of similar nature. We have to keep that in mind, that the situation, again, has gotten worse over time. Let's put back on the screen, please, Mr. Matoush. I worry that the more we continue to push this idea of differences as making us better, the more we fracture ourselves and begin to lose our joint heritage. This is not to say that diversity and cultural differences in and of themselves are bad. Quite the contrary. In fact, our diverse traits enrich our thought processes through individual experiences. But though our characteristics have directed our experiences, and our experiences in turn inform our views, those characteristics should not provide the principal guide for discussions of diversity. What I was saying there back in 2010 in this student newspaper article is that we shouldn't dismiss somebody's lived experiences given a certain race or ethnicity. They inform your views, but it is your views and how those experiences inform your perspective that is really what matters. Let me read one more passage from this article, The Inherent Divisiveness of Diversity. Focusing on the differences of ethnic, racial, and other identities diverts attention from ideas themselves, the main force of progress and social change. And in an educational institution like Regis especially, the expression of varying perspectives to develop informed, concrete, defendable viewpoints is what really matters. To be intellectually diverse is to acknowledge that not everyone agrees with you. Rather, it means that we recognize the difference in perspectives and are open to alternative viewpoints and their presentation and to thoughtful dialogue. The most effective educational leaders stimulate thought and respectful debate, not simply shouts of amen. The important thing is to realize that what really matters is the differences of opinion and openness to them, not physical or biological characteristics. The latter attributes merely inform our experiences and our views, and we shouldn't have to devote a day or a week to the practice. So that article, it's not the entirety of the piece, of course, but that article spurred quite a controversy back in 2010. Interestingly, there were calls for me to be fired from the Regis University student newspaper staff. There were discussions going on in sociology and anthropology classes and accusations of racism and bigotry for simply saying, look, we should be focusing on intellectual diversity and how your own lived experiences from race and ethnicity may play into that, is relevant insofar as it informs your views. I mean, that was fundamentally what I was saying. I suggested we have a unity week in addition to a diversity week. What was so interesting, too, was a Chilean immigrant professor of mine who was a self-described socialist, and he was the faculty advisor for the student newspaper. He was puzzled. Why is there such a controversy? This makes perfect sense. I completely agree. Again, Chilean immigrant, self-described socialist. We hardly agreed on anything. In fact, one day in Spanish class, we argued about Milton Friedman in Spanish. Don't have me debate you in Spanish anymore. I'm very rusty. But we literally debated Milton Friedman in Spanish with the other students looking around like, what's going on here? But the point is, it spurred a bit of a controversy. I was never fired from the campus newspaper. On my Regis University radio show, I actually held a full-hour discussion where I had students, faculty come on the program and challenge my views. And we had a discussion that one liberal friend of mine said, that's so civil, NPR wouldn't have you. Because that's what racist bigots do. They engage in genuine conversation with those with whom they disagree, right? No. The difference here is I was actually willing to engage and have a conversation, and other students were, and faculty were, calling into the program. Student body vice president came in to the radio studio, and we had a discussion. I thought it was very constructive. I actually accomplished the goal that I wanted, which was to get a discussion going more than anything. But now things are much worse. I talked to students and faculty at Regis, and they say, Jimmy, there's no way you could do the radio show or the kind of articles that you published at Regis today because of the political climate, and especially when it comes to issues of identity politics. It is a dangerous path that we find ourselves going down. Yoda's saying is true. Once you start down the dark path, forever will it dominate your destiny. He's right. Unless it's not too late. Maybe he's wrong. Maybe he is wrong. Maybe we can turn back the clock. Mike Gonzalez thinks so. We'll have to see what happens. But we all have to do our part. We're going to take a break here on Jimmy at the Crossroads. But as we continue with our conversation today, think about what my experience at Regis University in 2010 was like. Think about the emphasis on diversity and now how it has expanded beyond that into white privilege and microaggressions and other concepts that fit in with diversity politics. And think about the divisions that we're seeing play out across the country right now in terms of the violence and the chaos and the destruction that in many ways lie at the feet of identity politics. Those are perspectives we need to keep in mind, or aspects of this story we need to keep in mind as we talk with Mike Gonzalez, author of the new book, The Plot to Change America, and delve in deeper into the idea of identity politics and how it has grown and manifested itself in American society today. We must be mindful and we must be wary. We must also know exactly what's going on and how to combat it. It is our duty. You just watched a clip from Jimmy at the Crossroads. Don't miss more engaging, intelligent talk. Subscribe to the Jimmy at the Crossroads YouTube channel today. You want to catch our live show. And I love your support.
I got Jimmy at the Crossroads, making sense out of no sense. Yeah.